the Ukrainian government in Kiev has followed through on the commitments that it made in Geneva. We need Russians to do the same.
Our Sunday panel weighs in on growing questions about the president's foreign policy. And our Power Player of the Week, Brian Stokes Mitchell, who's been called Broadway's last leading man.
And to dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe.
All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The scandal over how President Obama handled the Benghazi terror attack that killed 4 Americans got new traction this week. Under court order, the administration had to release an email from a top presidential advisor that indicates the White House helped shape Susan Rice's talking points when she appeared here and on other Sunday talk shows 5 days after the attack. In those interviews, Rice blamed reaction to a video and ruled out a pre-planned act of terror. Joining us now from New Hampshire is Senator Kelly Ayotte, and here in studio, California Congressman Adam Schiff. House Speaker Boehner announced Friday that he'll call for creation of a select committee to investigate Benghazi. Senator Ayotte, a year and a half after the attack, is it too late?
Well, Chris, I don't think it's too late. We have to get to the bottom of this. I called for the creation of a select committee right after this attack, so I'm glad that the Speaker has done that. The investigation to date, there's been important work done in the committees, but it's been disjointed. And the latest revelation from the White House really tells us that we need this select committee. Why is it that we're just receiving this email that really shows where the idea from the video came? Because that video was not in the talking points, and yet that is what Ambassador Rice pushed on your show and every Sunday show.
Congressman Schiff, you have said that the Benghazi, and you put it, conspiracy theories are a terrible distraction from the real issue, which is bringing the people who killed these 4 Americans to justice. Is this House committee part of that distraction, and how certain are you that Democrats will participate and put, since it's a select bipartisan committee, will put members on the committee?
Chris, I think it's a colossal waste of time. We've had 4 bipartisan investigations of this already, and I think it's driven by a couple things. The Republican conference is so fractured. There's really only 2 things they agree on. They don't like Obamacare, and so we've had 50 votes on that. And they do like talking about Benghazi, so we've had 4 investigations on that. But I don't think it makes sense, really, for Democrats to participate. I think it's just a tremendous red herring and a waste of taxpayer resources. So I hope the Speaker will reconsider, but it looks like he has bowed again to those from the farthest right of his conference.
But when you say you don't think it makes sense for Democrats to participate, you're saying that you think that the Democrats should not appoint anybody to the special committee and let it simply be Republicans holding this investigation?
That's what I'd recommend. I don't know what our leadership will ultimately decide, but I don't think it makes sense for us to give this select committee any more credibility than it deserves, and frankly, I don't think it deserves very much. We've tread down this path so many times, and in terms of this Rhodes memo, if you look at this 4-page Rhodes memo, there's only 2 sentences that pertain to Benghazi, which track exactly what the CIA talking points were. So it's very hard to use this memo as some kind of a justification.
Well, let me pick up on that, because for months, literally months, spokesman Jay Carney flatly denied that the White House had anything to do with the talking points that Susan Rice used when she came here and on other Sunday shows, and blamed the attack on a protest of the anti-Islam video that had spun out of control. Let's take a look at those denials.
It has been repeatedly said by some of the critics on this issue on the Hill that the White House provided talking points. That has been categorically refuted. The only edits made by anyone here at the White House were stylistic and non-substantive. They corrected the description of the building or the facility in Benghazi from consulate to diplomatic facility and the like.
But then this week, under a court order, the administration had to release this memo from White House advisor Ben Rhodes. Under the list of goals for Rice, he wrote, to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure policy. Carney may have been right. They didn't edit the CIA talking points, but it turns out Ben Rhodes and the White House had written their own talking points.
Well, they'd written their talking points about what was going on in these protests in 24 countries, and I think it's important to remember what Ambassador Rice was preparing for on your show and others. When she sat in the seat that I'm sitting in right now, Benghazi was not the first question you asked or the second or third. It was actually the 14th question you asked, and that's not a criticism, but it's a reflection of the fact that the focus of your show, like many others, was this conflagration, these protests going on in 20 capitals around the country.
You're exactly right, but sir,
yeah.
I have the Ben Rhodes memo right here, and in it, he says, one of the goals, that we will be resolute in bringing people who harm Americans to justice. The only people who had been harmed, Americans who had been harmed at that point, were the 4 Americans who'd been killed in Benghazi. On another page, he specifically refers to a report in a British newspaper about Benghazi. So to say that this memo wasn't about Benghazi is just not true, sir.
Well, it's true that 2 sentences of the 4-page memo are about Benghazi. But those 2 sentences are exactly what the CIA talking points said. And that's exactly what Susan Rice tracked.
No, because the CIA had never talked about the video.
Well, what the CIA said was that the protests in Benghazi, and obviously the CIA got that wrong, were based on the protests inspired by the protests in Cairo, which is what the ambassador said. Those protests in Cairo were inspired by the video, and that's exactly what the ambassador said. That's exactly what the intelligence community believed at the time. That's what General Petraeus briefed us on, and Director Clapper. That's what was thought at that time. So you can take issue with what the intelligence community did, but there's nothing that contradicts that in the Rhodes memo. In fact,
let me bring in Senator Ayotte, because Jay Carney says the same thing that you just heard from Adam Schiff, Senator Ayotte, which is that this memo, which does mention Benghazi and talks about Americans being harmed, was not about Benghazi. Take a look.
I can say it again and again, and I know you can keep asking again and again. This document was not about Benghazi.
Senator Ayotte, do you buy that?
Chris, it doesn't pass the laugh test, but here's the problem. The CIA testified before the House Intel Committee, Director Morell, that in fact, they did not put a causal connection between the attacks and the video. And in fact, when that was said, that's not in the talking points anyway. The video story clearly came from the White House. And why did it make a difference? 6 weeks before an election, pushing a story about a spontaneous reaction to a video, which is what Ambassador Rice said on your show and other shows, as a result of the attacks, as opposed to a coordinated terrorist attack, is a very different narrative when you're trying to push that this was not a failure, a broader failure of foreign policy. So there really isn't an explanation of why she connected it to the video, why the president and others connected it to the video even as late as September 20th. So that is inexplicable. And I would ask Congressman Schiff, do you know why did she connect it to the video? And also, she came on your show, Chris, and she also said that the consulate security was strong and significant. Where was the evidence of that? Because we know that leading up to these attacks that there were a whole course of history that showed that there's a deteriorating effect on that consulate, and yet she went on your show and said that the security of the consulate was strong. Look at those talking points and what it says about that.
Senator, I want to get to a different point, and that is the fact that while the administration this first week kept saying this was not a pre-planned terror attack, in fact, the people on the ground in Libya and who with direct responsibility kept saying it was. The CIA station chief in Libya said it was a terror attack. And now we found out this week, so did the deputy intelligence director for AFRICOM, U.S. forces in Africa. Here was his testimony.
What we did know quite early on was that this was a hostile action. This was no demonstration gone terribly awry.
Senator Ayotte, why do you think it is that the CIA, the State Department, and the White House ignored their people on the ground when they said this was not a terror attack?
Because the White House was pushing a political explanation leading up to an election. The president had been saying al-Qaeda was on the run. They were trying to push a narrative of strength in foreign policy. This did not fit their narrative. This was actually an indication of a broader failure of foreign policy, the light footprint policy. And in fact, we know also that Secretary Panetta and Chairman Dempsey also said the same thing. They knew right away it was a terrorist attack. And yet that was not pushed by the administration. They were trying to push this video that it was some kind of spontaneous reaction that was out of their control. That's what was leading up, and that's significant.
We're running out of time, Senator Ayotte, and I want to give, before we move to Ukraine, I want to give Congressman Schiff a chance to answer. The politics of this. One argument is that what the White House was doing here was trying to protect Obama's reelection efforts. Another question, which I know some Democrats have raised, is that this now is an effort to hurt Hillary Clinton before she runs for president, if she does, in 2016.
Well, I think that's clearly the case, but let me also address what the CIA station chief said, because we heard in Director Morell's testimony that the station chief at CIA thought that this didn't begin as a protest for a couple of reasons, which the analyst didn't agree with. The first was that he cited press reports that said there was no protest, but in fact there were press reports that said there was a protest. He also said that he didn't believe the signals intelligence, and the signals intelligence indicated there was a protest. And finally, Chris, and this is an important point that gets lost when everyone cites the station chief in Tripoli, the station chief said that one of the possible motivations he had to concede was the video. Now, no one wants to mention that, but that was also the belief of the station chief. So I think what Mr. Morell, the deputy director, said was that there was no interference by the White House, that it was their best assessment, Morell's, General Petraeus, and others, that this began as a protest.
Let's talk. Wait, I hate to rush you along, but I want to ask you both about Ukraine because it's very important. This week, President Obama and German Chancellor Merkel said that they would impose tough sanctions on entire sectors of the Russian economy, not only if Russia invades Ukraine, but also if Russia disrupts the May 25th presidential election. Senator Ayotte, you've introduced legislation to impose those sanctions not later, but right now.
They need to be imposed now, Chris. The bottom line is if we wait till the elections, it'll be too late at that point. We already see the playbook of what happened in Crimea happening in eastern Ukraine, and it's time to impose tougher sectoral sanctions to provide support for the Ukrainian military. And if we, at this point, Russia's not getting the message. They're violating the so-called Geneva Agreement, and you've got Russian agents in Ukraine fomenting unrest, causing all the violence, and really creating a situation right now that warrants tougher sanctions by this administration.
Briefly, Congressman Schiff, have the Obama sanctions up to this point been too weak?
Well, look, I think we're going to ultimately need stronger sanctions. The challenge is not getting the administration to go along with stronger sanctions. The challenge has been getting our European allies to do exactly that. It's going to affect their economy much more than ours. And any sectoral sanctions that we administer without the Europeans, that they backfill, aren't going to be effective. So, yes, I agree with the Senator. I'd like to see stronger sanctions, but I want to see them done in concert with our allies. And our job is really to get them on board. Regrettably, I think they're going to be necessary, and we got to inflict a heavy penalty on Russia for this kind of violation of its neighbor sovereignty.
Congressman Schiff, Senator Ayotte, thank you both. Thanks for coming in today. How big are this week's Benghazi developments, and is creation of a House Select Committee a good idea? Our Sunday group will join that conversation. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about Benghazi? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on
the email and the talking points were not about Benghazi. They were about the general situation in the Muslim world, where you saw, as you may recall, protests
to prepare Susan Rice.
Correct, but you misstated it. In fact, this was not. It was explicitly not about Benghazi.
Well, things got a bit testy this week when the White House press corps challenged Jay Carney's claim the Ben Rhodes memo was not about Benghazi. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Britt Hume, Fox News senior political analyst. Elise Viebeck of the Hill newspaper. Syndicated columnist George Will, author of the new book, A Nice Little Place on the North Side, about Wrigley Field at 100, and former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman. Well, we asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this one on Facebook from Jeff Goldstein, who asks, why have Republicans handled the investigation so badly? Why wasn't a special committee appointed over a year ago? Britt, how do you answer Jeff? And more than a year and a half after this attack, is appointing a select committee now a good idea?
Well, I think it's probably worth a try, even though it's pretty late in the game. It's not at all clear that there'll be any buy-in from the Democrats, and bipartisanship has always been a characteristic of these effective select committees, so we'll see. As for why it's gone so badly, it's because it was scattered over several committees. There's been some ineptitude. There have been some poor decisions taken. For example, the decision to just the committees of jurisdiction to do this, I think, was the principal one. But the investigations have not been terribly effective and have left us with this continuing mystery, unresolved to this day, is where did Susan Rice get the idea to go on the Sunday shows and blame the whole thing on a video? We certainly believe now that it didn't come from the CIA. Jay Carney says it didn't come from the White House. Apparently he has no responsibility ever for anything. And we think we may have gotten a hint of it from this email, but it's still not clear. So there are things still to investigate.
For months, I think it's fair to say that John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, resisted calls for a special committee. He just didn't want to do this for a variety of reasons. It might look too political. It might seem to promise more than the committee could actually deliver. And I think there was also a concern that the committee would be seen as investigating Benghazi instead of talking about jobs and education and health care and things that directly affect people's lives. Elise, what changed?
Well, I think that this reflects actually a frustration on Speaker Boehner's part with how the investigation has been handled by some of his deputies, including Darrell Issa of California. I think that this special committee,
we should say, of the House
Oversight Committee, who has been the one basically in charge and doing the most work on the Benghazi investigation. And I believe that by now establishing a select committee, Boehner can exercise more control over the process and be able to move forward with what Republicans see as this revelation in the Rhodes email.
What do you make, and maybe you've done some reporting on this, I thought it was very interesting that Adam Schiff said the Democrats may not participate in this, which really is going to change it if this is just a Republican committee and not a bipartisan committee.
That's right. Well, there are politics on all sides of this, and I think Democrats see an opportunity here to make the committee look as political as they believe it is inherently. By not participating, that makes Republicans look bad, and so Democrats may in fact do that. We'll find out probably this week.
The big development this week was, of course, the forced release of this Ben Rhodes email that seems to contradict White House claims that they had absolutely nothing to do with Susan Rice coming on Fox News Sunday and the other shows and talking about a video. It's been called the smoking gun. Our colleague Charles Krauthammer compared it to the discovery of the Nixon tapes during Watergate. George, how significant is it?
Rather less than the Watergate tapes, which showed a president at the heart of a crime wave, suborning perjury and raising hush money and all the rest. This is a memo pushing a narrative that we now know to be false, that he should have known to be false at the time, that he probably did know was false, and therefore the memo was meretricious. That all said, that's only one of the subjects this committee, if there is to be a committee, and I'll come to that in a moment, should be investigated. First is, why were we deeply embroiled in Libya's civil war in the first place, illegally in my judgment? Second, was there adequate security in Benghazi? Obviously not. Third, should the military have been able to respond when the attack was underway? That's an intramural argument within the military that General Lovell, by his testimony, poured kerosene on, and that's fine.
We should just quickly point out he was the deputy intelligence chief of AFRICOM who said that he thought that we should have responded.
Which now comes to the video, which strikes me as not the most important of those topics, and the committee. We certainly made news this morning, you did, with talking to Mr. Schiff. I do not know why at all any Democrat would want to participate in this. By boycotting it, it just becomes a redundant and obviously partisan Republican exercise, and it's only a matter of time before Democrats raise the following question. Would there be a select committee if it didn't want to have the power to subpoena the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for obviously reasons pertaining to presidential politics?
Congresswoman Harman.
Well, Chris, a little additional fact, which is, I believe a couple days ago, Darrell Issa subpoenaed John Kerry, who during the Benghazi time was a member of the United States Senate. They subpoenaed him to appear and testify on May 21st when he's scheduled to be in Mexico doing some serious work. This is a circus.
No, but wait. But excuse me. The reason they've asked him to testify is because of the fact that last August, the Issa committee subpoenaed the State Department to come up with all the Benghazi documents, and they didn't come up with the Ben Rhodes document. Now, you can argue whether or not John Kerry should be subpoenaed, but it wasn't about the attack. It was about something he was in control of.
He shouldn't be subpoenaed, and I don't know whether this all leads to Hillary Clinton or some way to embarrass her during the election season.
Wait, since you brought it up, can you explain why it was that when the House committee subpoenas all the Benghazi documents, they didn't turn over the Rhodes memo, but when a court judge orders them to do it, they turn over the Ben Rhodes document.
No, I can't explain it. There may be some claim of executive privilege. I think it's posed a political opportunity right at the moment. But let me just make a couple comments on Benghazi. I know something about this, and the day after the Susan Rice appearances, or the day after the event, I was meeting with some senior intelligence committee folks, because I still advise in some capacities on boards to some of our agencies, and I think there was legitimate confusion. I agree about the point that the video was in Egypt, and nobody really knew what the facts were, but I'm reading from the Ben Rhodes memo, which I've never seen before, and it said, we're not aware of any actionable intelligence indicating that an attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi was planned or imminent. And I think that was accurate. So,
just because we didn't have actionable intelligence about 9/11, that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
No, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, and I have called that an intelligence failure. And by the way, this was an intelligence failure, but it wasn't a conspiracy. And there aren't aliens in Area 51, and Vince Foster wasn't murdered. And it's time to move on and focus on the real problems in Libya and other problems that affect the voters.
You're right. There wasn't a conspiracy in the United States to mount the Benghazi attack. That's not the question. The question was whether in the aftermath of the attack, when the administration sent its UN ambassador out to explain it to everybody, and she did so falsely, that there wasn't a conspiracy to create the false talking points that she used. I'm not talking about the CIA talking points. I'm talking about the talking points used on that program that day, which were monumentally misleading and have since been shown to be false and based on no intelligence of any consequence that we know of.
And my answer to that is no, there wasn't a conspiracy. They did not turn out to be accurate.
Well, how did it happen?
I think that people made, at the time, their best guess at the facts.
Well, wait a minute. But where did the idea that the video had anything to do with Benghazi come from?
Where did it come from?
Yeah.
I think it came from people who weren't sure about it,
well,
but
can you
I would
identify
not say
anybody?
that
Can you
was
identify
falsely inserted in
any CIA information? Can you identify any
Ben Rhodes
source
talks
of that?
about the video or the movie 5 times in this memo.
Only
5 times.
My view is, having been around at the time, that this was not deliberately misleading. It turned out to be wrong, but it was not deliberately misleading.
And on that, we're going to take a break. We'll see you all a little later. I don't think we're going to solve this now. Incidentally, for more on the latest developments, join Brett Baer for Fox News reporting Benghazi, White House cover-up revealed. Revealed? It's a question mark. Tonight at 9 Eastern on the Fox News Channel. Don't miss it. And what do you think about the Benghazi scandal? Join the conversation